Saint Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk, two souls in search of the divine. In the silence of the morning, when the first lights of dawn touch the stained glass windows of a cathedral, two stories meet in time. Two young people separated by continents and circumstances, but united by something deeper than any distance: the relentless search for God and the burning love for souls. Today we will learn the extraordinary story of Carlo Acutis, the young Italian saint who transformed technology into a bridge toward the divine, and discover the surprising convergences with Charles Kirk, whose heart also beats with the same passion for Christ and the salvation of souls. The birth of a modern saint. Carlo Acutis was born on May 3, 1991, in London, son of Italian parents. From his early years, something extraordinary shone in this child. While other little ones played with cars and dolls, Carlo showed a unique fascination for two apparently opposite worlds: technology and the sacred. His mother, Antonia Salzano, would later recall, Carlo constantly asked why people didn't love Jesus with the same passion he felt. For him, love of God was not a theory, but a throbbing reality he lived every day. Testimony of Antonia Salzano: "My son saw in every person a soul that needed to know Christ's love. He couldn't understand the indifference toward something as beautiful as faith." The Eucharist, center of everything. If there was something that defined Carlo Acutis' spirituality, it was his immeasurable love for the Eucharist. From age 4, when he had his first mystical encounter with Jesus in the sacrament, Carlo understood that there lay his reason for living. "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven," he used to say. For Carlo, each Mass was not a religious routine, but a personal and intimate encounter with the living Christ. This Eucharistic devotion would become the engine of his entire existence. Theological reflection. According to Catholic doctrine, the Eucharist is the source and summit of Christian life, Lumen Gentium 11. In Carlo we see this truth incarnated in an extraordinary way. His life revolved around the Blessed Sacrament, finding there the strength for all his works of charity and evangelization. Scene 4. The technological genius at God's service. At barely 11 years old, Carlo mastered programming like few adults. But his technological genius had a unique purpose: to evangelize. He decided to create an online catalog of Eucharistic miracles of the world, a project that would change the way of understanding apologetic in the digital age. "Internet is a gift from God," Carlo affirmed, "and we must use it to bring souls closer to Christ, not to distance them." While his contemporaries used technology for entertainment, Carlo transformed it into an instrument of sanctification. Montage. The Eucharistic Miracles Project. For months, Carlo researched, catalogued and documented more than 130 Eucharistic miracles from around the world. Each case was presented with scientific rigor, authentic photographs and profound theological explanations. His work became an evangelizing tool that today is used by the Universal Church. Scene 5. Charles Kirk, a heart in conversion. While Carlo lived his holiness in Italy, on the other side of the world, a young man named Charles Kirk began his own spiritual journey. Raised in a different environment, Charles would show with time an equally intense search for truth and a heart that burned to touch other souls. Like Carlo, Charles possessed exceptional intelligence and a natural capacity to communicate complex ideas in an accessible way. But what most draws attention is the sincerity of his spiritual search and his growing approach to the Catholic faith. Parallel reflection. Both young men, separated by time and geography, shared something fundamental: the impossibility of living a superficial life. Both Carlo and Charles sought deep answers to the most important questions of human existence. The love for the poor and marginalized. Carlo Acutis' holiness was not limited to prayer and technology. His love for Christ immediately translated into charity toward the most needy. He regularly visited nursing homes, served in soup kitchens and destined his pocket money to help the poor. Testimony of a volunteer. Carlo had a special way of treating elderly people and the homeless. He looked them in the eyes as if he saw in each one of them the face of Christ. He wasn't condescending or artificial, he was genuinely loving. His mother remembers how Carlo insisted on buying sleeping bags for homeless people they saw on the streets of Milan. "We cannot pass by suffering," he said. Christ is there waiting for us to recognize him. Scene 7. Charles's intellectual search. Charles Kirk, for his part, showed an intense intellectual search that led him to explore the great philosophical and theological questions. His approach to the Catholic faith was not emotional or superficial, but deeply rational and studied. Like the great converts of history Newman, Chesterton, Maritain, Charles found in Catholicism not only emotional answers, but the intellectual coherence that his brilliant mind demanded. His conversion resembled more a gradual awakening than a moment of sudden spiritual convergence. Both Carlo and Charles shared the conviction that the Catholic faith was not an enemy of reason, but its most perfect ally. Both saw in Catholic doctrine the most beautiful synthesis between human intelligence and divine revelation. Scene 8. Marian devotion. One of the most beautiful characteristics of Carlo Acutis' spirituality was his tender devotion to the Virgin Mary. He prayed the Rosary daily and saw in Mary the safest path to her Son. "With Mary one never goes the wrong way," he constantly repeated. His Marian devotion was not sentimental, but theologically grounded in the understanding of Mary as the new Eve, the mother of the Church and the perfect intercessor. Parallel with Charles in recent times, Charles Kirk also showed a growing appreciation for the figure of Mary in Catholic theology. His intellectual approach to the Marian mystery revealed the same logic that had led Carlo to such deep devotion: Mary as the perfect realization of human cooperation with divine grace. Scene 9. Youth apostolate. Carlo had a special gift for reaching the hearts of other young people. He didn't preach with elaborate words or grandiose gestures. His testimony was simple but powerful. He lived what he believed with an authenticity that was irresistible. Testimony of a friend: Carlo never made you feel judged if you didn't believe or if you had doubts. He simply showed you how it was possible to be happy living for something greater than oneself. His joy was contagious. He organized retreats, participated in prayer groups, and used every opportunity to share his love for Christ. But he did it in such a natural way that it never seemed forced or artificial. Scene 10. The passion for truth in Charles. Charles Kirk, for his part, channeled his passion for souls through a tireless search and defense of truth. His media platform was becoming more and more a space where the fundamental questions of human existence were explored with honesty and depth. Like Carlo, Charles could not remain indifferent to the spiritual needs of his generation. He saw in the young people of his time an authentic thirst for transcendence that the superficial answers of modern culture could not satisfy. Convergence in method. Both understood that modern evangelization required new methods, but without changing the eternal message. Carlo used technology, Charles used mass media, but both had the same objective: to bring souls closer to Christ. Scene 11. Suffering as a path to sanctification. In October 2006, Carlo began to feel the first symptoms of what would be diagnosed as fulminant leukemia. Far from lamenting or rebelling, Carlo received the news with a serenity that amazed all those around him. "I offer all my sufferings to the Lord for the Pope and for the Church," were his words upon learning his diagnosis. At 15 years old, Carlo understood something that many adults take decades to comprehend: the redemptive value of suffering united to the passion of Christ. Doctrinal teaching: the Catholic Church teaches that suffering, united to that of Christ, has salvific value not only for the one who suffers it, but for all humanity, salvifici doloris. Carlo embodied this truth heroically, transforming his illness into a constant prayer for the conversion of sinners. Scene 12. The last weeks. During his last weeks of life, Carlo maintained his characteristic serenity and joy. He continued worrying about his website of Eucharistic miracles, about his friends, about the poor he used to help. Testimony of his mother: until the end, Carlo worried more about us than about himself. He consoled us, who were suffering seeing him depart. His spiritual maturity was extraordinary. On October 12, 2006, Feast of Our Lady of Pilar, Carlo Acutis gave his soul to God. He was 15 years, 6 months and 9 days old. His last word was Jesus. Scene 13. The immediate legacy. Carlo's funeral was extraordinary. Hundreds of young people, many of them without religious practice, filled the church of Santa Maria Segreta in Milan. Something in this teenager's life had deeply touched their hearts. Immediately, testimonies of conversions, spiritual healings and graces obtained through his intercession began to be reported. Carlo's fame of holiness spread with a speed that surprised even ecclesiastical authorities. Theological reflection: the speed with which veneration to Carlo Acutis spread confirms the Catholic teaching on the communion of saints. Saints don't die, but are born to a fuller life where they can intercede more effectively for us. Scene 14. Charles and the Call of Conversion. Meanwhile, Charles Kirk continued his own spiritual journey. His recent years showed an increasingly deep approach to the Catholic faith, a search that recalled the intensity with which Carlo had lived his faith since childhood. Like Carlo, Charles could not settle for superficial answers to life's deepest questions. His intellectual search led him inevitably toward the truths that the Catholic Church had guarded for 2,000 years. The parallel of the search: both Carlo and Charles shared that holy restlessness that doesn't allow rest until finding truth with a capital T. Both understood that the human heart is made for infinity and that only God can fill it completely. Scene 15. The Beatification Process. On July 5, 2018, Pope Francis authorized the promulgation of the decree on Carlo Acutis' heroic virtues, declaring him venerable. 3 years later, on February 21, 2021, the same Pope authorized the promulgation of the decree on the miracle attributed to Carlo's intercession. On October 10, 2020, in Assisi, Carlo Acutis was declared blessed. Thousands of young people from around the world gathered to celebrate this historic moment, the first millennial saint of the Catholic Church. The miracle of beatification. The miracle recognized for Carlo's beatification was the extraordinary healing of Matthias Viana, a Brazilian boy with a congenital malformation of the pancreas. After his mother prayed asking for Carlo's intercession, the boy was completely healed. Scene 16. The Universal Message. The figure of Saint Carlo Acutis transcends borders, cultures, and generations. His message is universal. It is possible to be holy in the 21st century. It is possible to use technology to get closer to God. It is possible to live a full and happy life centered on Christ. From Brazil to the Philippines, from the United States to Poland, young people around the world find in Carlo a model of accessible and authentic holiness. He was not a saint of impossible virtues, but a teenager who lived ordinary virtues in an extraordinary way. His life program. Carlo summarized his spirituality in 3 simple points. 1. Daily Mass. 2. Daily Rosary. 3. Frequent Eucharistic adoration. This programmatic simplicity contained profound wisdom. Holiness is not in doing complicated things, but in doing ordinary things with extraordinary love. Scene 17. The Shared Virtues. When observing the lives of Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk, surprising convergences emerge that reveal universal archetypes of authentic spiritual search. Authenticity. Both were characterized by an authenticity that was magnetic. They didn't pretend to be perfect, but they did constantly struggle to grow in holiness. Their honesty made them credible and attractive. Intellectual passion. Both Carlo and Charles possessed brilliant minds that they put at the service of their spiritual search. They understood that faith and reason are not enemies, but allies in the search for truth. Love for souls. Both felt genuine compassion for the spiritual needs of others. They could not remain indifferent to the suffering or spiritual confusion of their contemporaries. Scene 18. Modern Apostolate. Carlo and Charles intuitively understood something that the Church has taught since its origins. The gospel must be preached in the language of each era. Carlo used the internet. Charles uses modern means of communication. Both rejected the false dilemma between tradition and modernity. They understood that the message is eternal, but the methods must adapt to each generation. Their fidelity to Catholic doctrine went hand in hand with admirable evangelizing creativity. The new evangelization. Pope John Paul II spoke of the need for a new evangelization that would be new in ardor, methods, and expression. Both Carlo and Charles perfectly embodied this vision: genuine ardor for Christ, methods adapted to their time, and authentic and attractive expression of faith. Scene 19. The Example for Our Era. In an era marked by superficiality, relativism and materialism, the figures of Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk shine as beacons of hope. They demonstrate that it is possible to live with depth, seek absolute truth and find happiness in the spiritual. Their testimony is particularly relevant for today's young people, who often feel lost in a world that offers them many options but few satisfactory answers to their deepest questions. The antidote to the modern crisis, both Carlo and Charles offered something that contemporary culture rarely provides: an ultimate meaning of existence, a reason for which it is worth living and, if necessary, dying. Scene 20. The Call to Universal Holiness. The final message of these two extraordinary lives is simple but revolutionary. We are all called to holiness. Not only religious people, not only adults, not only those who live in monasteries. Everyone, without exception, is called to be holy. Carlo demonstrated it by being a normal teenager who lived in an extraordinary way. Charles demonstrates it by being a contemporary young man who seeks truth with genuine passion. Both teach us that holiness is not a privilege of a few, but a universal vocation. The Catholic doctrine on the universal vocation to holiness, the Second Vatican Council taught clearly: all in the Church, whether they belong to the hierarchy or are cared for by it, are called to holiness. Lumen Gentium 39. Carlo and Charles embody this teaching luminously. Scene 21. The Path to Canonization. Currently, the process toward Carlo Acutis' canonization continues. The Church studies a second miracle that would allow his elevation to the altars as an officially recognized saint. Meanwhile, his influence continues to grow exponentially throughout the world. Testimonies of conversions, spiritual healings and graces obtained through Carlo's intercession arrive daily to the postulator of his cause. His influence transcends confessional borders, reaching even non-Catholics who find in his figure an admirable model of life. Scene 22. The Spiritual Heritage. Carlo Acutis' legacy materializes in multiple initiatives: websites dedicated to evangelization, youth movements that follow his example, technological projects at the service of faith. His charism continues to inspire new forms of apostolate. Charles Kirk, for his part, continues his influence through his media platform, where increasingly the influence of his Catholic convictions information can be perceived. His authentic search for truth inspires thousands of young people not to settle for superficial answers. Scene 23. The Encounter with Christ. What fundamentally unites Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk is their personal encounter with the living Christ. It's not about a merely intellectual adherence to a doctrine, but about a personal and transforming relationship with the person of Jesus. For Carlo, this encounter took place especially in the Eucharist. For Charles, it seems to occur in the honest intellectual search that leads him inevitably toward the truth that is Christ. Both paths are valid and necessary in the Church. The centrality of Christ. Both Carlo and Charles understood something fundamental. Christianity is not a philosophy or a moral code, but the encounter with a living person who radically transforms human existence. Scene 24. The Mutual Influence of Saints. One of the beauties of the mystery of the communion of saints is that saints of different eras influence each other mutually. It's possible that Carlo Acutis' intercession is influencing Charles Kirk's spiritual path, just as Charles's testimony may be inspiring other young people toward holiness. This invisible network of intercession and testimony is one of the most precious treasures of the Catholic Church. Saints are not figures of the past, but current companions on our journey toward God. Scene 25. The Message for Today. In a world that often seems to have lost the sense of the sacred, the lives of Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk remind us that the divine continues to act powerfully in the midst of the human. Their testimonies are an urgent call to rediscover the transcendent dimensions of existence, profession, or circumstances. We can all live extraordinary lives if we center them on Christ. Carlo did it being a teenager with a computer. Charles is doing it being a modern communicator. Each one of us can do it from our own vocation and circumstances. Scene 26. The Final Invitation. The testimony of St. Carlo Acutis and Charles Kirk is, ultimately, an invitation. An invitation not to settle for a mediocre life. An invitation to seek holiness. An invitation to love God and souls with the same passion they demonstrated. Everyone is born as originals, but many die as photocopies, said Carlo Acutis. Both he and Charles show us how to live as originals, unique, authentic, holy. The final call: what will be your response to this invitation? How are you going to use your talents, your time, your life to love God and serve souls? Holiness is waiting for you. Like Carlo, like Charles, you too are called to be holy. Saint Carlo Acutis, pray for us. Charles Kirk, accompany us in the search. May we all reach the final goal, holiness.